Warning. Tongue and Geek contains heavy spoilers. If you haven't read, watched, or played the content being reviewed this episode, know that we will definitely spoil major plot points. Also, this show isn't for kids. We use words like and and it would take too much time and effort to edit them all out. Please don't tell our moms. Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to Tongue and Geek, where two more sexy white boys on the internet give their sultry opinions on all things geeky. I'm Isaac.
And I'm Tyler.
And we're joined once more by our darling friend Erika. Say hello, Erika.
Hi, guys.
Fantastic. Today, to celebrate that most sensual of holidays, St. Valentine's, we have decided to review a love story, one of the most well-known in modern cinema. Today, we're reviewing the movie adaptation of Twilight from 2008, directed by Catherine Hardwicke, screenplay by Melissa Rosenberg, starring Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, and of course, based on the book series by Stephanie Meyer. Tyler, you want to give us a bit of background?
No, I don't, because guess what I didn't do?
God damn it, Tyler! Son of a bitch! Fucking ass! You fucking ass! You're never ready!
I have had a busy couple weeks, okay?
Okay. So
well, I mean, what background is there to give about Twilight?
There's so much to say about Twilight.
Yeah, there's so much to say about it, but like...
I feel like you're in tune with Twilight. You know a lot of the shit that went down with Twilight. Would you care to give us some background?
Mostly what I remember is that it came out in 2005, which was when I was volunteering at the library, like just getting started in my field, and it was on the new release shelf, and I remember being like, wow, what a cool cover. I'm sure not going to get sick of that.
Fun fact about the cover, the apple on the cover of the book represents the Garden of Eden's forbidden fruit for Edward and Bella's forbidden love.
I guess that does check out.
There's more artistic merit in the cover art than there is.
I mean, if you want to count like biblical reference as artistic merit, as if every piece of literature hasn't referenced the Bible before, then sure, we'll give it that handout.
Yes, I'm giving it that handout.
That's about all the backstory I know, other than Stephanie Meyer was kind of unique in that she had 4 books and she released them annually, like once a year. That was a very big deal when I was working at Borders. And people...
That's hard. That's hard to write that much, especially the size of those books.
And to be able to provide her fans that consistency, like that's a pretty big deal. It's not something that, comparable things like that had been popular, like the Harry Potter series had been able to accomplish before.
So I actually have a bit of background prepared on this. Fun fact, the reason that this series exists is because Stephanie Meyer sent out basically her manuscript to a bunch of people, was rejected a lot of places, but there was an inexperienced assistant at Writer's House who didn't know that young adult fiction is typically like 40,000 to 60,000 words. Meyer's original manuscript was 130,000 words.
Wow.
So this assistant didn't realize that, like, oh, it's not supposed to be this big for young adult fiction, and she passed it along to her boss, and the boss was like, all right, yeah, we'll give this one a shot. So this unnamed assistant is the reason we have Twilight today. But we're not talking about the book. I'll let you know, I read 4 chapters of this book to try and do a little bit of back and forth discussion about how the book differs from the movie. 4 chapters was all I could handle. that was the best I could do. That was my best effort, which is hilarious because back in middle school, I remember reading the first and second books and then being like, that's enough Twilight. So my tolerance for this series has actually gone down over time. It's not been rekindled in any sense. The movie was in development hell at Paramount from about 2006 to 2007 before Summit Entertainment got the rights to it. The screenplay writer, Rosenberg, finished the script right before the Writers Guild of America strike in 2007 and 2008, which is hilarious. There was so much divine intervention going on to, like, get this thing to not happen. Like, with the assistant at first being like, oh, I don't know enough about, like, this, I'm just gonna pass it along to my boss. It's like, that shouldn't have happened. And then Rosenberg's like, oh no, this big writer strike's coming up. And it's like, you shouldn't have tried, Rosenberg. If you hadn't done that, the movie wouldn't have come out. But it did.
Wow, like every step along the journey for Twilight, it was just pure. Nobody knows what they're doing. Basically, is why Twilight became a thing.
It was just like it was people fighting for this series to exist. Meyer was deeply involved in the movie's production, so I feel like at least from Meyer's end, she believes it's a faithful adaptation. Kristen Stewart was 17 when this film was made, and Pattinson was 21, which is adds an extra layer of creepy to all this. And something I found out...
Art imitates life.
Mm-hmm, something I found out that I never needed to know is that Meyer actually released a gender-swapped version of the original book called Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined in 2015.
And it has a green apple on it.
Yes, with Edward and Bella gender swapped. So, that's enough.
Okay, wait. Gender swap. Not different point of view, but gender swapped.
Yeah, it's gender swapped.
Okay.
Tyler, there is also a Edward POV version of this.
Okay, that's what I was confused about. I'm like,
Meyer has released this book multiple times.
Hey, you know what? More power to I'm honestly
we can tell the same story over and over again.
I'm honestly kind of interested in how the gender swap version would play out.
It's honestly
if different at all.
It's kind of impressive, the lengths that this is. I will give credit where credit is due. She managed to write a shitload and publish it very quickly. That is impressive from any writer's standpoint. Whether or not the quality of that work stands the test of time, we will discuss now. But we're not talking about the book again. We're going to talk about the movie.
Well, I want to interject here with some disclaimers. Back when Twilight was a huge thing, like, I was younger and I had the same shitty kind of attitude about it as everybody in the world did. And, oh, it's stupid and terrible and everybody who likes it is dumb and it should just go away. But over time, you mature and you put that kind of childish mindset behind you. And when you floated the idea to do Twilight for Valentine's Day, I was like, you know what? Why not? Let's see what it's really like. I had never seen any of the movies, never read the books. I was just aware of its dominance in pop culture. Mm-hmm. So, without the adolescent disdain I carried for it for so long, going into it blind as an adult was pretty interesting because I'm just going to bear the lead here. Like, I don't aggressively hate it, but I don't think it's so bad as to have like so much derision that it has accrued over the years.
Well, that's
at least this first movie. I don't know how bad the other ones get.
That's a great point, and I think this series does deserve a lot of the hate it gets, but there is certainly also an element of the hatred for Twilight became its own cultural phenomenon that was as big, if not bigger, than Twilight itself. Unfortunately, I think there's a bit of sexism tied into that because, like, there was stuff with, like, San Diego Comic-Con where, like, there was these huge gatherings for the Twilight movies and, like, people were just like, they're ruining Comic-Con, these Twilight fans, it's garbage. And, like,
God, I remember that.
Yeah.
Ooh, blast from the past.
Certainly. So I don't want to go into this with the idea of, like, if you like Twilight, you're garbage. No.
Yes. Yeah.
None of us like Twilight. None of us enjoyed this. You're not a garbage person for liking it. We're going to discuss our problems with it. If you disagree, so be it. Everyone's entitled to their opinions. Plenty of people like Thor Ragnarok, and as we keep repeating, that is perhaps the most infuriating film that any of us have ever watched. But let's get into the actual review. First, thoughts on Twilight the film.
It's Twilight the film, I think, is for me more disappointing than the books. Not to say that I'm a fan of the books, but there's nothing I can really point to about the film does kind of, it feels true to the books, but it's not a pleasant movie to look at.
No.
It's not a pleasant movie to look at because of the acting. It's not a pleasant movie to look at because of the weird tone, like the filter that's put over everything. Like, it just...
It's so blue.
It's blue and gray. It's like the camera was sad.
Yeah.
The camera was sad when it was filming Twilight.
That is,
like, I don't want to be here. I could have filmed like Avengers or something. You're really gonna make me film this?
Yeah. And I get that it's like we're very much going for like the Forks, Washington, like gloomy, we don't have sun atmosphere, but between like having to watch the acting and then having to watch like just every place they go, indoors, outdoors, no matter what's happening, have just like that weird camera look. There's a lot of weird camera angles, which we talked about a little bit amongst ourselves
unnecessary
before.
Camera
angles.
A
lot of weird sweeping shots.
Yeah, sweeping shots, weird spinning that doesn't need to happen, weird zoom-ins. Like, it's just the thing that bothers me the most about Twilight is just it's hard to look at. It's hard to look at two actors who I think are pretty good actors trying to make this weirdness work, and then it's hard to look at like the scenery and the shots themselves.
Yeah, it's a real shame that this is these actors' breakout roles because, and I think I said this while we were watching it, I honestly feel like these actors are putting on amazing performances, not in the sense that I am invested in their characters, but in the fact that like they are performing so inhumanly and without any human emotion that, like, that in itself shows how good of actors they are. Like, you would think there would be some human aspect of themselves that would slip in despite what the script says and despite what the director told them to do. But no, like, they managed to pull off this weird, inhuman chemistry the whole time.
Yeah, Bella and Edward, I almost said Jacob. Bella and Edward, they don't feel like real people.
No.
Which is hilarious because they're the main characters. But, like, one of the positives I could say about the movie is that some of the supporting characters are decent or likable and, like, feel like real people. Mm-hmm. But, like, these guys, Edward and Bella, are just, like... I said it before when we were watching it. I'm like, this movie is, like, so ridiculous. It almost feels like it's on purpose. Mm-hmm. But it's not.
And what I find interesting, too, is Robert Pattinson just recently admitted that when he was auditioning for Edward, he took a Valium right before his audition.
Oh, wow.
Because he was still relatively new in his career. Before this, he was really only known for Harry Potter, and that was when he was 15. Mm-hmm. And he said that he felt like, you know, he was freaking out, so his agent was like, oh, like, take a Valium, like, it'll be fine. And he said he felt so, like, drugged out, and he said that, like, it helped him bring this spacey, detached energy into his portrayal of Edward, and they were like, that's what we're looking for. We love it. And he got the role right then.
That's fucking hysterical.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Something you said earlier, Erika, gloomy. That is just the whole tone of this movie, of the book, the little bit I read at least. And you can have a gloomy aesthetic in a film, in a book, or whatever, but it doesn't feel earned here. Like,
no.
Right out the gate, there is this immediate sense of everything in here is going to come from the perspective of someone with severe depression, and we're never going to get, like, a valid reason as to why or how this happened. it's just going to constantly feel like everything's awful and there is no brightness in the world, and it's not a good feeling. Like, if you're gonna give us gloomy, you have to do it for a reason. This film just seems to do it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, I hate this saying, but I think it really applies here, is style over substance. Because we discussed the unnecessary camera movements, the rotations and the zooms and the tilts. Camera movements like that are used to emphasize mood or a performance or something that the filmmaker is trying to convey non-verbally. But with this, it's so like apparent and like in your face, like just like a stylistic choice for the sake of it. None of it feels organic. It's just like, oh, the camera's whooshing around them in a circle in the woods because it's like romantic, I guess, because they're falling for each other, I guess. But because the characters are so stiff and unbelievable, and because the movie looks so gloomy, even though it's trying to tell like this sweeping, bracing romance, it has this off-putting air about it the whole time that you can't get invested in. Because for one, aside from the visual aesthetics of like the town itself and the blue, everybody looks like they're carved out of soap. Like,
the vampires,
like they're like not even just the vampire, like everybody, but especially the vampires. Like nobody, you can't see anybody's like pores. There's no like texture to anybody's skin. Like everybody's just so washed out. It's so like clean and shiny looking. It's just blech. It's icky. It's icky looking.
Which really makes it even weirder when you see the strange, like, vacant expressions that Edward and, like, some of the other vampires have. And it really seems like it was just the like, color tone. It's more of, like, well, this is angsty, so we need to have angst. It's like someone's Tumblr or something. Mm-hmm. Like, the aesthetic. It's not really, like, telling the story. It's not essential that it look like this. And the people look extremely weird. I agree, especially the vampires. I think we should be able to look at them and be like, oh, they look a little bit different. But when you're watching this movie, they look appallingly different. It's very obvious there's something wrong with these people. And they're not even in the sun sparkling.
Yeah. Like, in universe, you feel like because the vampires are so extraordinarily pale, and because their eyes always look so weird, that like people would talk about it or like ask them like are you sick or like what's going on? Why do these people look like this?
That's one thing that infuriated me about the book, and I guess it also applies to the movie as well, is that they would go back. Meyer would go back and forth between describing the vampires as these grotesque, sort of inhuman creatures, and then at the same time trying to depict them as like these beautiful, godlike figures. And it's like trying to capture grotesque beauty, especially in writing, but also in film, is like it's such a balancing act, and Meyer just doesn't have the writing chops to do that, and the film does the exact same thing that she does. It just does not manage to capture this idea of grotesque beauty, because they are not beautiful in any sense. Like, you look at these vampires and you're like, those are walking corpses. Like, those people look dead and they're somehow still moving around. Like, you get the like grotesque aspect of it. They don't look attractive in any sense.
Like, every vampire movie, like, visually depicts the vampires far better than this movie, because every other vampire movie has, like, visual cues like, oh, they might be in dark clothing, or you might catch a glimpse of their fingernails, which are too long, or they might look a little too pallid than normal people, but it's never to the point where, like, oh, that's a vampire. Like, I feel like the people in this universe should be like, oh, the Cullens, you mean those weird vampire people that live up in the mountains or whatever? Like,
the Addams family look more like flushed in the face than these vampires. It's hilarious. Oh, it's bad the way they look. The makeup department probably followed, their instructions, but like they should have taken some liberties because it's not good.
I think you're forgetting that they look dapper as fuck because they have actual baseball uniforms for some reason.
Oh god, the baseball scene. Who owns baseball uniforms?
Yeah. 1900s vampires.
You know what? I take that back. That actually kind of makes a little sense that maybe they all joined a little league team back in like the 1900s or something.
But it's still so weird and like a proper of nothing. That they have it.
That's another point I wanted to bring up. The romance here is garbage, and we're going to talk about how it's garbage throughout this entire review, but there are nuggets of a good story in here, of fascinating elements to this, and the fact that they are so shoved to the side and never explored is infuriating. The bit where we find out that God, I can't remember any of the characters' names besides Edward and Bella, but basically Edward's adoptive father. We found out that he was a doctor during the Spanish flu, and that was when he, like, turned Edward and his wife into vampires to, like, save them from the Spanish flu. That's a fascinating story. I want to know the story of the vampire doctor who fought through a plague. Like, that's interesting, but we don't get anything with that aside from this brief bit of exposition of, oh, that's when I was turned. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's like nuggets of interesting elements to this world that are far more interesting than the actual love story. And you see these and you're like, well, I wish this was about that instead of this.
Right?
I mean, we haven't even really discussed the story. Do we really need to talk about the story?
We have to, but let's talk about what we want to before we have to get into that.
Yes, the backstory of the Doctor character is far more interesting than the main plot. I like the idea of just, a vampire falling in love with a human and like the human getting acclimated to being with a vampire clan, but that's disappointing because they don't do that well even, and they have to introduce like a thriller/horror threat as well. That's also just underwhelming. That feels completely tacked on.
Can I just say, it's kind of creepier that they never address the age difference. Like, if it were a main source of tension in the plot that, like, oh, Edward has been alive for well over 100 years, but, like, she isn't. Like, I feel like if they addressed that and that was a serious point of tension in their relationship, it would be less creepy than the fact that we're just supposed to accept that, like, oh, this 100-plus year vampire fell in love with a teenage girl.
Yeah. It's
this 100+ year vampire who only goes to high school ever. So who else is he going to meet? Yeah, again, I don't agree with it. I do think it's kind of odd that it's not even really brought up that much in canon, like comparable things like True Blood. It is mentioned, and it is something that the characters themselves being in a relationship discuss. But Bella and Edward don't really discuss it all that much.
It's just,
and no offense to people out there who think this is a good romance. I think you're in the wrong place if that's what you came here hoping to hear.
Sorry, we're going to shit all over this. It's just so
and
weird.
It feels so tired to shit on Twilight. Like, everybody shat on Twilight for how long, and like it's finally like moved on, but like, gosh darn it, like
it's not good. It's not.
All of the reasonable criticism that it has garnered over the years is completely valid. Like, now I have full context for how bad the Bella Edward romance is. Now I have full context for fucking sparkling vampires. Like, the sparkling. Again, I feel like I'm stuck in like 2010 bitching about sparkling vampires. But I kind of forgot that was going to be a thing when we started watching it, and then when it was coming up, I'm like, "Oh shit! This is the part of the sparkles that like everybody and their mother hates." It's this huge dramatic thing, like they're talking all this overly dramatic soap opera dialogue to each other, and like he's gallivanting through the woods with her.
He says this is the body of a monster, and he looks like he's just had glitter thrown all over him.
They couldn't even do the sparkling right. He doesn't even look all that sparkly. It just looks like somebody off camera, threw a handful of glitter on him, and that's it.
I think it's also hard, though, because the original content they're pulling from is so absolutely melodramatic and ridiculous and over the top, like the the Twilight books read like fan fiction, and as someone who's been reading fan fiction since the early 2000s, it reads like a truly bad fan fiction, because Bella Swan canonically is extremely pale for no reason that's ever given to us as any kind of reason. And this is also a series in which she gets bit by a vampire on her hand, so her scar is paler than the rest of her already pale body, and that scar for the rest of her life remains a few degrees colder than the rest of her body and sparkles in the sunlight. You know, like the scar from where she was bitten. Like, this is the source content that they have to work with. So I really empathize, like we had talked about when we were watching the movie together, like the Lion and the Lamb line that, you know, is in
that line to stay in.
She did. It's like, as you're seeing the movie, it's like there's so many problems here, but like the source content,
it is Meyer's vision realized. It is a faithful adaptation.
I would know, but I guess it is from what you guys are telling me.
The little bit that I've seen, it is a faithful, or the little bit that I read of the book, it's a faithful adaptation. I will argue that the book is a little more. I didn't read through all of it because, my God, it's so fucking long. But, like, I would argue the book's a little more interesting because it's all told from Bella's perspective. Not that Bella's a good character, mind you, but, like, you can kind of psychoanalyze her as you're reading. It's kind of like, the hell's wrong with this girl? It has kind of that aspect with the book, whereas with the movie, she's just so... like, not getting her inner monologue completely breaks any interest in Bella you would have in the film, because she is just portrayed, and again, this isn't Kristen Stewart's fault, I'm sure this was all director notes, she is portrayed just so absolutely devoid of feeling and emotion and human personality that, like, there's nothing to latch onto there.
Yeah, I mean, it's really that simple. And again, this is another term I hate to use, specifically because the wrong kind of people have co-opted it for their nefarious agendas, but you can call her Mary Sue, because there's a lot of criteria that go into a Mary Sue, and I think she ticks all of the right boxes pretty much. Like, it's almost funny how, again, it goes back to it almost is feeling like this is a parody or a satire, but it's not, because she's magically just amazing because people love her for no reason, because she's main character and everybody loves main character, and she has like one flaw that's not really a flaw, it's just a character quirk. Oh, she's clumsy.
Let's make it clear. As a person, Bella has numerous flaws that we as the audience despise. But
the narrative itself doesn't.
The narrative itself does not criticize her to the extent that we do. Like, she gets away with so much shit in these books and movies just because of, like, the narrative allows for it. Like, it never questions the terrible decisions she makes, or the horrible way she treats people, or the way she's like constantly seeing the world around her as terrible and awful, despite the fact that nothing happens to her to make it seem awful. Like, until she is introduced to vampires.
Yeah, and that's the... What were you gonna say, Erika?
Just that, like, she's considered to be like the true archetype of Mary Sue's, because if you read what Bella Swan, she's described to look like Stephanie Meyer.
Oh,
that's
really?
what Stephanie Meyer. Yeah, if you look at Stephanie Meyer and you look at the way that she's described, I think Stephanie Meyer's even admitted it. Like, that's her, and her only flaws are that she's clumsy, which everybody finds so endearing, and also that, like, she's brooding and, like, moody, which, if anything, just draws the boys in further. Everything about it is so absolutely Mary Sue.
The fact that nothing at all is done on her end, and yet every single guy instantly falls in love with her, is just, it's so infuriating. Like, you could, like, out the gate, everyone loves her. She is immediately brought into this large friend group of people who have known each other for years. Like, 2 or 3 guys start hitting on her on top of Edward. And it's just like, there's no reason for it. She hasn't done or said anything to anyone to, like, endear herself to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's instant love from all the...
We also, from a vampire's perspective, she's instantly special. Her blood is special. The way that she smells is special. Her magic brain, they can't read her thoughts, is special. Like, even later, spoilers, when she's going to get pregnant by, like, a vampire somehow got you pregnant, which shouldn't be possible because they have dead sperm. That's special. You're going to be pregnant for 2 weeks only. That's special.
And they shouldn't be able to be owners.
Well, apparently their hair and fingernails and stuff don't grow because they're dead. It's dead cells, so it's weird. Yeah.
They don't have blood circulation, so Edward shouldn't have been able to get a boner.
I'm guessing it's not the blood, it's the sparkles that lift his dick.
I was just imagining he'd going in with a half-inch of flaccid dick.
He could.
Oh man, you're pulling out the pulling out
some in jokes.
Pulling out some in jokes that nobody's gonna understand.
Fine. We'll make it a running gag.
I do agree with you guys though that it's like sad. I feel like especially now in 2022, like with the COVID pandemic, like there are such interesting parts in the background, like the whole Spanish flu angle. I read that it helped teach a generation of kids about the Spanish flu because, you know, obviously we don't learn about that in school, even though we should. So it got some people interested in history, which is cool.
Edward's dad, whatever the fuck his name is like a million times more interesting than anything else that happens in this novel. His sister, one of them, not the mean one, but the other one who actually like smiled, was like the actress portraying her was bringing like so much more energy than anybody else in the movie. She was actually like trying to be like, hey, I emote, you know, I have feelings. And it was like, thank you.
What's her character's name?
Child. I don't remember any of the characters' names.
Carlisle is his vampire father who helped form this group of, they call themselves vegetarians. I remember that. It's hard for me to differentiate any of the, like, is it Renesmee? Is it like, is it Rosalie?
I think it's Alice.
It might be Alice. There's too many.
Because the younger one that saw the future.
Like, yeah, that's Alice.
That actress
by Ashley Greene.
Personality to her. She was like, I'm gonna actually emote in this movie. And she was also dating the guy who looked like he constantly had to shit. Like, what was his name?
Yeah, he constantly looked like he had to shit or was like really shocked.
Yeah, he looked like he had shit himself and he was hoping no one noticed like the entire time. His eyes were just wide. Like he was terrified.
He was one of the sister's boyfriends, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember his name because I don't even see him on the cast list right here, which I guess that tells you how important he is.
He's that irrelevant to the plot. That's the thing. We have a vampire family, an adoptive vampire family, and we learn nothing about them. We learn nothing about that. That in itself is enough to run an entire TV show, and I know this because they made a fucking show about it called What We Do in the Shadows. Like, you're not going to explore any of the aspects of the intricacies of immortals living together for an extended period of time? That's so much more fascinating than this bleh romance.
Yeah, but they're just background fluff for there to be the romance. The angsty nothing is ever good enough for okay romance.
We should go ahead.
I hate talking about like what a story could have done or could have been. Because, you know, talk about, you know, what it tries to do, but that's the thing. What this tries to do is so bad that you can't help but think of all the other ways it could have been more interesting. Because you're right, like it has all of these background elements that are barely touched on that feel like they could be fleshed out more because this is basically just a shitty teen romance with a vampire element. It's almost like an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like teen romance, but vampires. You know,
there's so many things that we don't even really like get into. That aren't like part of the story. That again, I don't want to harp on what it could have been either, but that are just more interesting than what we actually get. Like everything that Carlisle ever does like one of I think it's like his wife or something. Mm-hmm. He turns into a vampire after she like tried to kill herself. Like, and he like, yeah, there's one of them. I think her name is Esme. I can't remember. I think that's his wife, but I do remember from the books, there is a person who threw themselves off a cliff because they were full of grief. They almost died. They were presumed dead. They were brought to the morgue. Carlisle's a doctor. He's like, well, here's this dead person. Wait. They still have a pulse. I'm going to turn that into a vampire. Like, this man is just going around turning all these people into vampires, and that's what I care about. I don't care about, like,
and that's
I'm Edward, and I'm in biology class, and I'm, like, making this really weird face, like I'm going to throw up all over you like you stepped in shit, and it's because you smell so good.
Yeah, that's another thing of the hilarious, like, facial reactions and physical reactions they have to each other. Because I've seen clips and memes, of course.
It was Esme, and it was his future wife. She attempted suicide, and he was like, nope, I'm gonna save her. And then she's like, oh, I love you now. And then they got married. So
that's so interesting. Like, this story of like a vampire saving lives by cursing them with vampirism is like,
yeah,
it's so much more interesting than anything we get. And you've both said that you don't like looking at what a story could be instead of what it is. I think when that happens, that is an indicator of like how bad the current story is. You know, I don't think we do that. We don't grasp for those straws unless we're incredibly disappointed about what we currently have. Like
exactly.
If we weren't, we would bring these up as like an afterthought, being like, oh, wouldn't it also be cool if we learned some more about this? But the fact that was like one of the first points we brought up, that like there are more interesting elements that we could be exploring, that just shows how poorly this main story of the romance between Edward and Bella is.
And Tyler, I didn't mean to speak over you before. It's like while we're talking about it, it's sparking my memory. And one of the guys, I think it's the baseball bat swirling guy that we've looked at the GIF about. I think that's Emmett. Mm-hmm. Emmett got mauled by a bear. And then there was like, well, get Carlisle over here to turn him into a vampire, because this motherfucker got mauled to death pretty much by a bear. Let's save him. Like, this guy, like Isaac said, it's like this guy's just like, well, here's my cure-all of being a vampire, and I'm throwing that around willy-nilly, and then amassing a family based off of it. And then some of them are gonna be like dating and stuff because they're not really related. Like, that to me is so much more interesting than the weird awkwardness that they're like forcing between these two good actors who like aren't allowed to emote. So I didn't mean to talk over you. It's just like, as we were talking about that, Carlisle to me has always been so interesting. It's like, what are you doing, bro? That's so cool. That's so weird. That's so strange.
Erika, I've made an entire show out of talking over my co-host. It's called Tongue and Geek if you ever want to listen to it. So don't feel the need to apologize. Tyler, continue with whatever you were going to say.
We were remarking about how he was making the terrible...
The fact that you talked over him again.
The terrible face that he was making in biology.
Right,
That's what you're saying.
I was just going to say how hilarious the all these like reactions and how physical they are about everything is in context, because you see GIFs, you see clips, you see jokes about it, but when you actually sit down to watch the movie proper and realize that the GIFs and jokes that you've seen are unaltered and unedited, that it's actually how it plays out in the movie, is hilarious. When Bella walks into the classroom, biology or whatever, there's like an inexplicable like whoosh of wind that like blows Edward's paper, and like he literally puts his hand in his mouth like he's gonna puke. And I don't know what that's supposed to convey, because we later learn that her blood smells so intoxicating that it's all he can do to control himself from feeding off of her. But why does he look like he's about to barf his vampire guts all over biology class? You
think he'd have like a hungry look, like a predator about to eat.
Yeah.
And I guess I think what they're trying to convey is that like he's so like disgusted with himself for wanting to eat her that he's about to vomit. But, like, that's not what comes across at all. It comes across literally as, like, he sees her and he's like, oh my god,
she's stinks.
Yeah. And what I love about it is, like, it's not even just supposed to be us noticing it. Like, in canon, in the movie, she notices and makes confused faces and, like, smells herself. Because she's like,
Everyone in the class notices.
What happened?
Like, what the fuck you do to Edward?
Yeah. So, like, the fact that it's not just, like, everybody's so oblivious that even Bella, the thickest person on the planet, realizes his reaction. And then it's not even just that one moment. He literally goes to the advisor and is like, I need to drop this class. And then Bella walks in. He's like, like, it's
he smells too good.
That could have been played so funny if the movie wasn't so stuck up its own ass. And the book wasn't so stuck up his own ass. If it played this scene as like, oh, like, this is sort of hilarious, you know, the fact that she's like, what's wrong with me? What's his problem? Like, if it had actually played with that could have been an endearing, cute, funny scene. But instead, it just comes off as ironically funny because it's supposed to be like, oh, this is just showing how terribly Bella's treated and how no one likes her, even though everyone likes her, and how she has to like, if it would just pull its head out of its ass for a second, it could realize that, like, this is something funny you can play with.
No, but that's what makes great ironic comedy, is when a movie is so unaware of what it's doing. So Twilight is even more funny because it's not funny.
It's true. It's deep in the ironic enjoyment.
When you're watching Edward give Bella the side eye in an entire scene of class, and, like, it just gets more awkward and awkward as it goes on. Like, you know, nothing is going to get better from this point out. Like, they're not going to be able to salvage this.
We are 40 minutes into this review. Let's do a little bit of plot recap. Yeah, boy. Let's discuss a little plot. So, this whole thing starts off with Bella moving from, is it Phoenix, Arizona?
Yes, it's Phoenix, Arizona. She brings a little cactus with her to clue the audience in that she is from Arizona.
Her mom and dad are divorced. She's leaving her mom because her mom is going to start traveling the country with her new boyfriend. So she moves up to Washington State to live with her dad. She doesn't really have a good relationship with her dad, and she makes that very, very clear to the audience because neither of them talk or do anything to endear, like, their family relationship to each other. The dad, swear to God, he's doing his best, but he's clearly like this super awkward, super dysfunctional man who has no idea how to relate to his teenage daughter, who isn't a human being, so I don't blame him. But she starts going to this school, this new school, and as we've already mentioned, everyone instantly falls in love with her for some reason, even though she's does nothing to earn it, and she's constantly acting as if her life is terrible. She encounters Edward, who again sees her as like some horrible thing, and she's like, oh, why does he hate me automatically? And over time, she becomes obsessed with Edward. And it's so weird how this relationship develops. It's not just like bad. It's not just bad chemistry. If it was just like flat chemistry that has nothing to it, I don't think we'd be talking about this series. But the problem, I think, with Edward and Bella's relationship is that it's not fueled by any sort of character dynamic that, like, they have shared interests or shared personality traits or complementary personality traits. It's fueled entirely by this idea of obsession with one another. And that's supposed to play in with the whole, and Erika pointed this out to me, and I can't believe I never caught it before now, this whole allegory for, like, sexual urges and resisting them until marriage. This whole series is apparently an abstinence allegory. But, like, the whole relationship between Edward and Bella just comes off as obsession. And it's not done in a way that sells... It's not done in a way that sells it to me. Like, you could have a story about how people giving in to their physical urges make bad choices in a relationship. That is a very thick area of storytelling to look into. That's a very universal trait that the human experience has. Like, lots of people make bad choices based on physical attraction alone. But there's just it's not sold to me in any way. And part of it is like how we discussed, they don't look sexy. Like the vampires don't look sexy, so it's not that.
Yeah, they're walking soap people with red eyes.
But also the fact that Edward never does anything.
Nope.
To be sexy. He comes off...
No, well, neither does Bella, except for having hot, sexy blood.
She bites her lip, like, constantly, Tyler. We know that's the ultimate sex appeal.
Mm-hmm. But
well,
she's always doing it.
That's because what you're saying, Isaac, is that, like, there's literally no effort involved in establishing any sort of relationship. It's literally just... they want each other because that's what the story is.
And
that's it. Like, they have to find each other attractive, and that's where they lead off. They don't do anything.
It's a story
to make you believe it.
Yeah.
It's a story about lust without any lust in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a horny movie. It's a horny movie. The characters are horny for each other, but there's no tangible sense of, like, interesting sexuality in it. Yeah. It's weird. It's just creepy and weird. And
it comes off so much more creepy than if these two were just lusting after each other.
Yeah. I think so much of the problem is that you can say that for literally everything in this movie. Everything is a tell me, don't show me. Mm-hmm. Like, we're supposed to believe that they are in love and that they want to have sex because we're told that. Like, we're supposed to believe that Edward is dangerous because we're told that. We're supposed to believe that Bella's so popular and great because we're told that. We don't have any evidence of any of that.
Well,
it's just what we're told.
There is an element of amazing visual storytelling in the beginning where we see a shadowy figure hunting a deer in the woods, and the deer is obviously meant to be Bella, representative of Bella, the innocent, fragile fawn that is in danger of being preyed upon by these vampires.
And so the lion fell in love with the lamb.
Exactly, that can't be Bella. It would be a lamb.
Hang on, spider monkey.
I forget about the spider monkey every time. My brain like blacks it out. It's like, no, you can't walk around just knowing that. It's too bad.
No, movie, don't try to have cute banter. Fuck you. Who do you think you are? Running around leaving scars.
If that's their best attempt at cute banter, you know what? In a vacuum, I don't even think it's that bad of a line. But the fact that it comes...
It's the delivery.
But the movie doesn't support the tone or...
Right. It's the one moment in this movie where he says anything that seems to be, like, lighthearted and fun. And while that should be, like, a brilliant little part in the darkness, it comes out of nowhere and is fucking hilarious.
Yeah, whenever he does inject any levity, it feels like a kind of manic, drug-addled, like, he's gonna hurt you levity.
Edward,
like, because he's
a drug addict.
He seems incredibly unstable because he's mostly either not emoting at all, looking like he's going to shit himself, or blatantly just being very aggressive and like freaking out or storming at Bella.
And then he'll have these weird moments where he's trying to be sort of suave and laid back, but he'll immediately jump back into this like, I'm super aggressive and mean and you shouldn't be around me.
Yeah.
Like, he has such wild mood swings that goes... He's like emoting every emotion for Bella. Bella doesn't do anything, and poor Edward is going through every emotion in the spectrum. It's just... God.
It's almost to the point where it's like, I don't have anything else to say, because, like... what do you say about it? I mean, so much has been said about the toxic element of their relationship and how it's terrible for the fan base and for the young women who like the series, and how it doesn't in any way support a healthy relationship. And that's all true, but at the same time, I can't help but be like, but how many people really, though, are taking this as like inspiration for relationship?
We're going to get to review.
I know I'm asking for it, but like...
You're fucking asking for it. This was one of the biggest franchises in the world for a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for all its detractors, there was a massive cult following.
I know. And I'm forgetting my own history here because, and Erika can vouch for me because she was here for it. I do have a personal reason why I was so anti-Twilight back in the day.
Oh, really?
Because she worked at Borders. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember, was this the release of the Twilight DVD or the New Moon DVD?
It was the New Moon DVD.
Okay. And they were having like a release party at her store for this DVD. And like, I think I just like came to have like lunch with her on her lunch break.
No, it was our anniversary and I wasn't allowed to take off because it was such an important event. Like, people had wristbands. We had like a line.
God.
Like, it was a thing because there were special editions of the DVD. Blu-ray didn't even exist yet. It was just DVD. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what I was expecting. Like, I guess I was expecting just a crowd. Mm-hmm. But like, when I got there, it was like being at like a boy band concert. Like, all of the people there were just so obnoxious. Like, and not just obnoxious because there were just a lot of people and they were loud, but like behaviorally, they were taking copies of Twilight and like putting them all over the store to cover up other popular books. They were taking like cardboard cutouts of like Edward and Jacob and stuff and like messing with other customers in the store. They were like flipping other books around so you couldn't see their covers and just like being a complete nuisance. And I'm just like,
very toxic fandom.
This is the Twilight fan base?
And so many of them were mothers who brought their daughters, like 40-year-old women, 50-year-old women who were giggling right there with their daughters, like lusting over Edward the whole time. So that was awkward. There were like gay guys playing off that they weren't actually here for it. We had a whole Twilight trivia that was run by one of my coworkers, and she ended up like coming to the break room just like raging about it because she was so upset because they like got up and screamed at her that it was too easy and they wanted her to quiz them by page number on quotes.
Jesus Christ.
Like, it was bad, and it was not a good time. And again, no one was allowed to take off. Managers, everybody, we were all hands on deck.
That's bad. That's rough.
Yeah.
So yeah. There was a story I could have started off this podcast with, but I honestly kind of forgot about it until just now.
These memories, the Toxic Fandom. And that's with any fandom. Any fandom can be like that. There's certainly examples of that with any fandom, but Twilight was just the one that happened in that moment that like everyone remembers and looks back on and points to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and again, to reiterate, I don't mean this to shit on the entire fan base because, you can love what you love, but that was not a good view into the Twilight fandom circa 2010 or whenever New Moon came out on DVD.
Let's talk about what y'all brought up earlier, and it's Bella as a role model. Bella being a bad person and making bad choices and being generally just bad, that in and of itself isn't the problem. It's the fact that the narrative does nothing to like criticize her behavior that's the problem. There is no evidence within the book or the movie that we are supposed to see Bella as problematic.
Flawed protagonist, yeah.
She's not supposed to be a flawed protagonist. She's supposed to be this played straight, like she's in true, deep love with Edward, and their love is real, and even though it's based on these strong, primal urges, like they both have enough control over it to wait for the right moment, and like,
yep.
It's portrayed as true love, despite all of the fact that it's literally, and this is a problem with a lot of vampire romance, not just Twilight, it's literally based on a predator-prey relationship. If you're going to do a love story based on a predator-prey relationship, you have to take into consideration, like, what that looks like and what, like, real-world comparisons there are. Because, like, this is what baffles me about how this franchise is specifically so popular with women is like, Edward is such a creep and such a predator. He's literally a predator. And like sexual predation is such a real world prominent problem. I don't get how stories like this become so popular with women. Like maybe that's my white male ignorance showing, but like I don't get it.
I don't get it either, and that's why I like that Erika agreed to do this one, because she could probably give us more insight.
You guys are forgetting he's a bad boy.
Oh, God.
Hello?
But he's not, though. Like, he's a rich vampire boy that everybody just thinks is like cool and mysterious. That's not like the bad boy.
He gets perfect grades, causes no problems in school. He does literally nothing.
Like... So I think really what the success of Twilight is predicated on is not only its younger age group, because it was really more geared towards tweens than actual teens. I truly think what makes it so successful is its Mary Sue-ness, in that it's very much like wish fulfillment. Yeah. Like I have a friend, and we read V.C. Andrews books. And when we read V.C. Andrews books, there is always a part in V.C. Andrews books where somebody is swept up into a rich lifestyle, and we get to hear about how beautiful the house is, and how decadent the bedrooms are, and how huge the closets are. And we always enjoy that part, because we're like, man, look at this like mansion porn. That's so enjoyable. That's really what Twilight is about, because it takes these tweens and it sweeps them up into this, you're Bella, she's a blank slate, that's you, that's your personality. All of a sudden you're here, you call your dad by his first name, he gives you a truck, and you're the most popular girl in school, and there's two boys fighting over you. One of them is your childhood friend. Such a good trope, PETA. The other one is like this dangerous bad boy, like who, you know, you shouldn't be with because he's so dangerous, but like you can tame him. Like everything about it just screams like it's merging so many tropes together and allowing these very young, impressionable girls to just run with this fantasy. And it's really not based on anything, because, you know, Edward is very psychotic, if anything. There's nothing really appealing there, but it's like it wouldn't be so successful if it didn't give young girls the ability to do that.
Yeah. It's just... And
I also think it conversely worked the same way with like unhappy women like in their 40s. Like I said, how people were bringing their daughters. You know, you're unhappy in your life. I'm in this fantasy where I'm in high school again and I'm the popular one and these boys are fighting over me. Like the fact that anybody could fit in that slot, I think is what really gave it its popularity. It's not anything about the relationship between them or anything like that. It's just the ease through which people can slip into it.
It's so manufactured and gross.
It is.
I hate to scream moral outrage at any piece of media, or dare I say art. I don't want to apply that tag to this, but like, I hate to have a moral outrage over it, but like, the things that we take in, whatever form they are, have an impact on how we see the world around us. And I can understand looking at Twilight and being like, I don't want my impressionable young daughter to read this and think that this is a template for a healthy relationship or a healthy outlook towards life, even. I get why people would not want their children reading Twilight.
Yeah, and I think that's a completely valid concern, and I think those kind of conversations any parent should have with their kids when they're consuming media that the parents might find questionable. But at the same time, I think some kids are smarter than we give them credit for as far as, you know, media consumption is concerned. And I don't necessarily think being a fan of a certain story that might have problematic elements means that you're necessarily advocating for those elements, you know? I think you could totally be invested in the Bella, Edward, Jacob trifecta romance in this series. Mm-hmm. But also understand how it's kind of fucked up in a lot of ways. Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. It's such a tightrope walk between being like media does impact the way that we see the world, and also being like burn them fucking book. Like it's so hard to acknowledge both sides of that, because if you lean too far into one, you're ignoring real world implications of the media we consume. But if you lean too far into the other, you get into book bannings, and that's just never right. So it's like.
It is hard, and I agree with you guys. It really does have to come from the parents. I was vehemently against Twilight as far as something that anyone should be reading, let alone if they're under 18. And then 50 Shades of Grey came out, which is based on a fan fiction about Twilight, and then it just blew anything related to abuse like out of the water, because it was poorly done BDSM. Like that, just really, truly, like abuse hotlines and organizations really were advocating, like, please understand this is not okay. Like, even really kind of as a fantasy, because he hurts her without her consent. So it's hard because I feel like what came from Twilight is so much worse. And it's not as if, with the way the internet is today, kids could very much like go online and find a Kim Possible fan fiction that has like the same elements in it. So it's not to say like, if they weren't, they couldn't find it somewhere else, but it does really hurt me to see how like the different like abuse organizations have pointed out like the 10 signs of an abusive relationship are all there in Twilight. It's like verbal abuse and destructive criticism. Like the way that Bella does get put down a lot by Edward, like, oh, I have to be the responsible one because you can't be. Like pressure tactics, like there's so much of her being like, no, like let's just take a minute, and he's just like freaking out on her. Disrespect, like being put down in front of other people, breaking trust, withholding information, isolation, stalking, harassment, threats. Yeah, I mean, like, he literally, like, I honestly perceive it as a threat in the movie when he shows up and is like, get in the car. That's pretty threatening.
Erika, I hate to interrupt you because you're making some very powerful, salient points, but I just love the fact that your go-to of what kids today might look at is Kim Possible fan fiction, the animated Disney Channel series from 2002 to 2007, when most of the kids nowadays would have been born.
Well, I'm in 2005 mindset when this came out.
People shouldn't be any younger than we are now.
I know. Kim Possible was what most tracked for me when we were thinking 2005, that you would find some kind of like Ron Stoppable, like Shigo kind of thick or something. That exists. Shigo is a very weirdly shipped character.
I'm glad I have no context for this.
Everybody loves Shigo, but why with Ron? Like,
yeah, I don't know.
Never mind. We got to do a Kim Possible pod at some point. That's a great show. Don't get why she ended up with Draken at the end, considering that the relationship was like a boss-employee sort of thing, and it was played for laughs, but what the fuck?
Yeah. Well, I don't know really how to make the point that I was saying, so it's 100% fine, but the thing is, like, the reason Stephanie Meyer even did that gender-swapped book was because she got so much shit for people saying, like, you're romanticizing, like, emotional abuse and psychological abuse. Like, Edward may never hit her, but this is still abusive. And so she was like, no, Bella's a feminist, and I'm going to gender swap it and show you, like, how it's fine. And it's still not fine when it's gender swapped. Like, whether it's a woman...
Anything. When a woman is doing all this to a man, that doesn't make it any better. Like, fuck that.
Yeah. So, I know some schools use Twilight to educate about abusive relationships. That's a thing that I read before.
Wow.
So, I don't know. It's a really mixed bag because it's hard. Like, there are people who have sexual fantasies and kinks that can be very, like, you know, if it were real life, it's unhealthy. Mm-hmm. But since this is a book... It's so hard to make that argument, but I personally, if I had a child, would not want them to read it without the hugest disclaimer from me in the beginning and the end.
Right.
We're all influenced in some ways by the media we consume when we're that young.
Absolutely. It helps form who we are.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm glad that I already done most of my growing up by the time the Twilight came out.
Yeah, thank God. Thank God by that point I did get hit with the wave of like, oh, Twilight is garbage, and I got on that train, which, as obnoxious as it was, probably saved me from any of the, like, actual, like, oh, this is great, and in taking that in as, like, this is a positive, healthy way of how a relationship should work. Because we talk about how it's bad for, like, girls to read this and, you know, to accept this, but, like, it's bad for guys to read this, too, because they're gonna think, oh, if I'm super creepy and I'm super, like, emotionally all over the place, you know, some girl is gonna fall in love with me. You know, all I have to do is be
if I just come on really fucking strong
and not let her do anything, like, it's just bad. It's just bad. Don't let your kids read Twilight.
If I see, then I glower and I come on really strong and I loom and I do all of this shit. Like, they're gonna think I'm, like, intense and interested.
Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of media out there already, well before Twilight, that established poor relationship dynamics and poor standards for how to court for young men. But, like, this does not aid that in any sense.
Yeah,
they weren't as popular as Twilight.
I think the thing is also there's so many little things about it too. Like, there's so many little things Edward does, like ghosting. It's like, you know, he completely ghosts her. Are we normalizing that? And then there's also just, since we're talking about... Yeah. Well, when we're talking about the films too, because we're talking about the first Twilight, in the last Twilight movie, after they do have sex and she's lost her virginity, they have like this crazy shot of her in a broken bed and the room is destroyed and like the pillow has been ripped apart because he had to bite it to stop himself from biting her while they had sex. And it's like, it's supposed to maybe be a sexy image that this room is literally destroyed, but it's actually a very violent one. Mm-hmm. It literally looks like he just raged out and did everything he could do other than beat her while having sex with her. So there's just like a lot of weird implications about abuse in Twilight, whether we're talking about the movies or the books.
This could be such a fascinating avenue to explore if the books and the movies and such weren't playing it straight. As if that was like something beautiful that, oh, look how beautiful
if it had self-awareness.
Back. Yeah. It's just, ugh.
If it knew enough to criticize the story it was telling.
Mm-hmm. There's some smaller stuff that we could hit on, because we've talked a lot about everything we hate about this. I want to talk about the sort of vampire rule system that we have here. We touched on the fact that they glitter instead of explode in the sunlight. That's fucking stupid. Something that I kind of like and kind of don't is that every vampire gets a unique power. I like that in the sense that it makes each of the vampires a little more distinct. Like, they have no fucking personalities for me to base them off of anything, but I can actually sort of remember them based on, like, what their ability is. Like, how the one girl has the ability to see the future, Edward has the ability to read minds. Like, and I think you could play with that. And I can't say whether or not they do in the other books and movies, because I haven't read or watched them. But, like, I think conceptually, being turned into a vampire, giving you, like, a specific superpower has promise.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun thing to do with the mythos, because I think Dracula is the most, like, depicted fictional character in film.
Probably.
And that's just Dracula, not vampires in general. Mm-hmm. So for as played out as vampires are, trying to do something with the formula, like giving them all their own superpower, that's cool. But this just goes to show just the disappointing aspect of how, like, it's just kind of there to be there.
Yeah, it's not touched on. It needs to be touched on. The most they do with it is Edward talking about how he can read everyone's mind but Bella's, and that's part of what draws him to her, is that he can't read her. On a conceptual level, that's interesting. What should happen from that point forward is that Edward is trying to sort of, like, figure out how Bella thinks and acts and everything, but what seems to happen regardless is that he pretty much immediately figures out Bella's whole shtick. Like, every conversation they have is so straightforward, with them just immediately expressing their emotions and being, like, completely, like, I'm not gonna hold anything back with you, like, in a way that you absolutely wouldn't do with a stranger, that, like, it completely negates this fact that, like, Edward can't read her mind. It's like, why the fuck would he need to read her mind? She's literally telling him every single thing she's thinking and feeling at any given moment.
Yeah, and they do have a surprising amount of intimacy based on nothing, and I've never understood Edward's desire. It's like, the more he thinks that Bella thinks he's a vampire, the more he pursues it instead of staying away from her the way that he should.
And it's just another damn element of something that the narrative fails to, like, really do anything with, because it's another great hook. Like, oh, a vampire who can read minds can't read this mind of a girl whose blood is so intoxicating to him. So that opens up the avenue of him trying to learn how to relate to somebody when he can't just automatically know what they're thinking,
right?
And adjusting to that, and, like, developing as a character because of that. But nope.
No, he yells at her about it instead.
It's just another aspect of his, like, single-minded lust. Like, oh, your blood. Oh, I can't read your mind.
It could be an interesting aspect if we just fucking go for it, instead of this weird PG, like, lust but not lust that we're doing. It's just... allegory works when you actually, like, make one-to-one connections, and this... it's not making those connections. This whole, like, him wanting to feed off of her being an allegory for his, like, sexual desire, it's explicit enough that, like, yeah, you can get it when you look at it, but, like, none of the actual narrative beats tie to it. Like, it's never at any point like, hey, we're exploring how lust warps the way we look at each other. It's like, no, lust is love, and love is lust. It's like, that's a terrible thing to take away from this.
And because this is an allegory, a religious allegory for, like, abstinence and lust, because she's Mormon, right? Stephanie Meyer?
Yeah.
That brings up the question of how problematic are the villains in this movie, because they're, like, the ones that give in to their lust, thus equating, like, enjoyment. If the vampire lust for blood is equal to sex, then the vampires who openly enjoy feeding, quote unquote, are evil because they enjoy, they enjoy pleasure.
I just realized,
aka sex.
I also just realized, if we're making this one-to-one connection to vampirism being just sexual urge, the Cullens are fucking animals.
Yeah, they're in there. They're bestiality.
I'm avoiding fucking other humans by fucking the bear that I found in the woods.
So, allegorically speaking, the villains of the piece are not only murderers, but they're also sexual predators. Mm-hmm.
That's deep.
I mean, it's deep, but not, like, in the way that it's meant to be.
It's deep.
It's accidentally deep.
It has the potential for depth.
And it's also interesting because this was such a heavily sexed merchandising product, Twilight.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was so much lust involved in the merchandising, not even some of the, like, adult stuff, but, like, having him on your shower curtain, having his silhouette in your room. Those were all, like, licensed things that they had. Not to mention the, like, Edward Cullen panties where his lips are on your pussy.
Oh, God.
That's a thing.
God damn.
I need to get me a pair of those.
They were double layered because sometimes when you're reading fan fiction and it gets really spicy, is I think what was in I think that was in the tagline. And then, like I've talked about many times, the fact that there was an Edward Cullen dildo that was specifically produced. It took them like 2 years to get it just right as far as, like, the paleness and the sparkling, and you put it in the freezer so that it's cold.
That's so gross.
So that, like it was an extremely sexual, like, aspect to, like, so much of the merchandising, whether it was from, and I think actually the reason that was developed, I had read, was because there's a really famous, like, sex shop website that, because of their algorithm and their tracking, they could see most people were coming from a Twilight fanfiction website.
Oh, really?
And they were like, well, this just makes sense. We'll make an Edward Cullen dildo. And they made a fucking killing.
And just look at the visual presentation of the Cullens as opposed to the bad guys. The Cullens are, like, always dressed, like, conservatively, like, dress shirts and dress pants and just dresses and stuff like that. And the villains, the dudes walk around like tops open, like abs and pecs showing. The girl's not really sexualized, but like they all have like that sort of like bad boy, bad girl swagger. It's totally like intentional or not. I mean, it has to be intentional because she wrote it as an allegory, partially. It's just it says so much icky stuff about like sex and like sexual relations and violence, and it's just the more you think about it, the more
story of repression.
Problematic it gets.
Yeah,
it's a story of repress your urges until the sanctity of a specific ritual allows you to unleash them violently upon your partner, which is just.
But that's. Yeah,
so
I mean, that is in keeping with the religious teachings, though. Under no circumstances are you to do that before matrimony. But you're 100% right about, like, the violence behind it that I find shocking.
It's so fucked that, like, that's, it's tied to a real world viewpoint, not just this fantasy series, which just makes it so much ickier. Shit. What else is there to say about Twilight?
Well, I got to bring up the dildo, which
I was wondering if you were going to bring up the dildo.
Yeah. I've been saying, like, I feel like if it would just go deeper into the lust, it would be less creepy. And then you brought up the merchandising. I'm like, no, I'm going to backtrack on that statement. Like, it's not any better. It's not any better.
It's I know, and that's what's interesting about it is like the duality of it.
Mm-hmm.
That so much of it is about denying yourself and repression, but then getting to a point where you could just unleash it and go crazy with it.
Yeah.
So it's weird. And we're shown that in the films as well as like in the books and the merch, like the whole waiting until they're married and then he literally breaks the bed and rips the pillow apart. Like, it's weird. There's a lot of implications and everything, and it's none of them really good, but it is interesting.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I still remember, honestly, the most enjoyable movie to me is the last one, because...
Wait, you've seen them all?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I don't remember you seeing any of them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I've seen all of them. I didn't see any of them in theaters, but I've collectively like seen all of them like with certain friends. I don't really know anyone who liked it, but it is a very like memeable, fun thing to make fun of. It kind of always has been. Mm-hmm. The last movie, though, I think is like the most enjoyable, just because it's for a lot of reasons, but like I said, there's just such interesting, like, even when Edward is like getting ready to have sex with Bella for the first time, it's like he puts his arm up on like the headboard, and that in of itself, he's like grabbing it, and it's like, again, very violent. It's really weird how it's like you guys said, it's all about like repression until a point where now it's okay religiously, so we could just go fucking crazy.
And that's, I think, the problem with the whole Edward-Bella relationship is that there is never, ever a point, at least that I've seen, where it seems like the two genuinely enjoy each other's company. Like,
yeah,
at least in this first movie. I don't know what it's like in the other ones. I doubt it'll get much better, but...
it's not just about, like, actual chemistry, like, whether these two characters seem like they are complimentary towards each other. It's about the fact that, like, there's never a point where either one of them acts like they enjoy being around the other. It's always this weird, neurotic...
Yeah, it's all just angst. It's all just angst.
Obsession with each other. It's never like, I love you. It's like, I love you. It's... Yeah. There's never any softness, any tenderness, any just joy between the two of them. It's all just angst. And, like, I have to have you. It's just, there's nothing there.
Yeah, and I mean, that's very much true in the book and in the rest of the movies as well, because it's so much of it is like Edward being like, I'm too dangerous to be around you, so I'm not going to be with you anymore. Like, I'm punishing you. And then Bella being like, well, I'm just going to sit in this one chair for like seasons and then like throw myself off a cliff because you can feel when I'm in danger. So like, you'll feel that and you'll have to come see me. And then Edward being like, well, then I guess I have to be with you because I can't like trust you to be on your own. And I have to like protect you from vampires and stuff, so like I guess I have to. Like, there's never any like, oh, okay, we just actually like each other.
It's like, it doesn't paint love in a flattering light at all. Like,
and that makes me wonder about Stephanie Meyer.
I was about to say, like, what's her life like?
I know. I often think this because it's like she accidentally created something so toxic. Like, what have your experiences with relationships been like that this to you was the epitome of romance?
Right. It's just so icky and gross.
Twilight. Wow.
Twilight. This is our very delayed, harsh criticism of Twilight. Any final thoughts before we jump into review?
Final thoughts, like, detailed-wise, or just, like, final thoughts on the movie?
Just whatever.
I'll just do my final thoughts on the movie. Even though we just spent the last over an hour shitting on it, there is an element of ironic enjoyment to be had in it if you're in the right headspace.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it doesn't sustain itself for the 2-hour runtime, but it does have pockets of ironic humor in it that you can laugh at. So it's definitely a sit down with your friends and just laugh at this goofy movie that was really popular.
Yeah. See, I think
kind of thing.
I think Erika and I both have a much higher tolerance for bad shit and like hate watching things than you do in particular. I had a blast watching this with you guys. Like it.
I had fun watching it with you, but I wanted it to be more of what it was, you know? Like, I want it to be even worse, if that makes sense. Because then it would be more enjoyable.
I just do think it's fascinating. Like, I remember seeing these, you know, somewhat at the time they came out. Like I said, I never went to the theaters to see them. But I think they're really interesting and you know, kind of worth revisiting just to see how they've aged because of where the actors are at in their careers now. Like, we've got Pattinson, who's about to be Batman. Like, we've got, you know, Kristen Stewart, who's gone on to do many better roles and, like, may possibly be an award-winning actress sometime in the future. Like, it's really interesting to see them really, like, have their start here and to see how little of their actual acting prowess is here because they're hampered by the weird things that they're supposed to do according to the script.
Yeah, I will say that I'm glad that the both of them have been able to break free of the Twilight stigma.
Right. Because
for the longest time, like, the both of them are nothing but just, like, punching bags for, like, angry internet nerds. Just, Robert Pattinson is going to be in another movie, the fucking Twilight guy? Worst ever. Kristen Stewart's the worst actress ever. Stop putting her in movies.
It's almost just never on the actors. The actors are doing what they're directed to do.
And Kristen Stewart had started as a child actress, so, like, she had a longer career than Pattinson, so it kind of was extra sad to see that happen. Like, it's clearly from interviews and stuff, nothing that they really enjoyed. It was a paycheck, and they really were, like, villainized for their terrible performances and for the movies as a whole, which they didn't really deserve.
I'm going to give Twilight its one piece of credit, and it was that scene that when Bella first comes over to meet the Cullen family, and all of them are cooking, and they're watching like cooking videos, and then she's like, "I ate before I got here because I figured you all didn't eat," and they're like, "Well, darn it!" Like, that was genuinely cute. That was genuinely a cute, clever scene that briefly endeared me to these characters, because it's like, of course vampires would try, if they, like, one of them started dating a human, they'd try and, like, acclimate to human society again and be like, fuck, what do humans eat? Pull up the cooking videos on that YouTube thing that people have. I don't know. It's like, that was, like, clever and fun, and it was this one tiny respite in this desert of nothing. It was my one oasis of, like, yeah, that was a fun character moment.
And freaking Bella had to ruin it. Like, God damn it, Bella! Like, you're just meeting these people, and you're like, "No, I don't want to eat your food that you prepared for me because I already ate."
I really feel like
Bella.
I honestly feel like Edward ruined it though, because he had to know they were doing that and didn't tell Bella, like, "Hey, don't eat, they're cooking for you." Like, again, Edward's the shitty one here. Not that Bella's that great, but yeah, it was shitty. So funny to see how disappointed they were.
Yeah. But anyway, Twilight's bad.
Yeah.
At the end of the review.
What, 15 years later, we can say that the Twilight movie is bad.
Definitively. Review time, yay! Rotten Tomatoes. I want you all to first take a guess on what you think the critic score for this is. The tomatometer.
22%.
Erika?
Okay, like 30?
It is at
30.
It is at 49%.
Wow, that's far higher than I would have anticipated.
What do you think the audience score is?
That's a tough one because haters tend to brigade, but superfans tend to brigade as well. So the audience score can be anything. I'm going to go with a mid-range guess of 60%.
I can't imagine it being higher than that, but maybe as high as 70.
It is 73% audience score.
All right, okay, because it's been around. It's been around a while. So there's been plenty of time.
Still a lot.
Good for you, fans. Good for you, fans, for making your voices heard. I have no ill will towards you.
Okay, this is a short one. First one comes from Samantha S. Samantha says, perfectly captures teenage angst, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Does this film, does this book, whatever, capture teenage angst? It certainly captures angst in some form.
Yeah, I would say it's angsty, but I don't think it captures angst in anything realistic or relatable at all. It's just a soap opera. That's all it is.
I think Erika, when she was talking about the wish fulfillment earlier, she brought up a good point about how this is very much targeted towards teens and tweens and how they deal with, like, this is like, oh, I'm suddenly super popular and oh, I suddenly have all these boys fighting over me. There is an element here of how everything is over the top, blown out of proportion when you're in your tween and teen years. That is present. I don't know if I would say it captures it, because capturing it sort of implies this level of mastery over telling this story. And mastery is not a word that I would apply to Twilight in any fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see people relating it to the exaggerated nature of the angst, because they can connect that with what they're going through at the time or in the near past. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's not a completely invalid take, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some parts of it that I feel like can maybe capture the teen experience and, like, they can relate to, like, on a level that's real, not that they're the central point of the story, like the split family, like my parents aren't together anymore. Mm-hmm. I have to move because of that. I don't have a connection with my dad because they're not the traditional parenting, nurturing figure. That's normally the mom. Mm-hmm. Like, so I feel like there is some stuff there. It's very rarely the source of Bella's angst, though.
Right.
So it's hard to say, but the general, like, I am upset about everything all the time and everything is so important, that's very much happening in Twilight.
Yeah.
And
so sorry.
I was going to say, if you want to be charitable, you can paint certain aspects of it positively. Like, I mean, we were just talking about how stupid and Mary Sue-ish it is that she goes to school, a new school, and everybody instantly loves her. But on the flip side, it can kind of be seen as refreshing in that, like, it's not a story of a new kid being bullied, you know, and shat on by new people, but, you know, teens embracing another teen that's not, you know, from their town or from their school in a positive way, you know. So you could look at that in a positive light. This
series wouldn't be the massive success it was if it didn't have some kind of appeal. And I think teenage angst certainly is in that element of appeal here. Jordan M. says, I think that a primary reason this movie isn't seen as at least pretty good is because of a general underappreciation for saturated colors. Making colors vibrant is a wildly underutilized cinematography decision, and it makes movies like this, which may have otherwise been mediocre, stand out as among the most visually pleasing. 4 out of 5 stars.
What? Did he
vibrant colors?
Did he Twilight in a bizarro world? This is the most desaturated fucking movie of all time.
I think their brain and eyes, something got swapped in their, like, the nerves connecting their brain and eyes, because that is not what this movie looks like.
No, it's just muddy blues and grays the whole time. It's blech.
I had a review that I had saved that I thought was interesting from somebody who loved it, somebody who loved it as a tween and then watched it again as an adult, and kind of speaks to like the nostalgia of it as a tween, even while realizing as an adult that it sucks and is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
This person said they gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And they said, love it or hate it, you can't deny one thing. There's something about Twilight that makes it a defining feature of the late 2000s. It's presented as a fantasy that many found laughable, and yet plenty were willing to buy. A wonderful escape, mainly for girls, that they could escape like into a world where someone would come and save them from a mundane and vapid existence. Someone exciting and dangerous and attractive who would make them feel special and make their boring life secretly exciting. It can be argued that Twilight has some of the most objectively cringeworthy dialogue of all time, but it was a movie marketed for tweens. And they said that they will never forget how when they were 13 years old, they were mesmerized by the world of Twilight, discovered it accidentally when they were renting it from Blockbuster, which still existed. And they were fast forwarding through the kissing scenes because they were scared they were going to get caught watching them in trouble. And that she would act like Bella in school, like she was more interesting or knowledgeable, so that everybody would think she was very edgy and cool.
Now I'm immediately sad. Oh, that was a fucking roller coaster, Erika.
Wait, she's not done. She says,
God.
watching Twilight as an adult, the number of times Bella ignores the fact that Edward is stalking her and invaded her privacy just because they're attracted to each other is outlandish to the point of being hilarious and also dangerous. It's definitely not good and problematic, but it's a reminder of a time lost. I thought that was really interesting.
A well-articulated defense of Twilight. Bravo.
Yeah. I also have never thought about the fact that, like this person, probably a lot of people did like try to emulate Bella, and it helped make them feel more confident or like they were cool.
See that goes to what we were just saying, how people see things in this kind of stuff that we don't.
Yeah. I would never ever think that she's cool.
That's what makes it cool, you know?
Yeah. Right. She's not cool, guys, but I'm glad that it helped this person.
Different strokes for different folks. Okay.
Your opinion is stupid, but you're entitled to
it. Here's one from Joe M. It's very kind of similar to what Erika said, except perhaps more creepily phrased. Joe says, unadulterated pap, yet so enjoyable. Twilight has so many issues: wooden acting, stilted dialogue, awkward scenes, and a preposterous plot, but it just manages to suck you in. The teen love story of Bella, the petulant nubile maiden who we know is so complicated just by her very glances, and Edward, the moody, brooding hunk who is so sensitive yet so strong, is so sappy that you just have to keep watching. One of those films that falls into the so bad yet so good because it's pure teen fantasy. 3.5 out of 5 stars.
That's how I think a lot of people enjoy their Twilight, is on that kind of level.
Yeah.
Where you just like say, fuck it, I'm just gonna let this ridiculous melodrama play out and suck me in.
Petulant nubile.
Petulant nubile. That should be our new handle.
That's going to be a t-shirt. It's a petulant nubile maiden.
Hi, I'm petulant nubile here with tongue and geek.
No, I'm a petulant nubile maiden.
I also found this really awesome review from this person who wrote, I want to say about 500 words about Twilight 2008, the movie, and the entirety of their argument is about how they got baseball wrong. It's really, really a fun review. They said, I get that the baseball world and the vampire fantasy world don't often share the same sphere of existence, and one knows little to nothing about the other, but I feel the need to highlight something that bugs the heck out of me other than the unhealthy and abusive relationships that are at the center of this story. And they go on to talk about how no one in the books or movies ever bothered to research professional baseball because Bella's stepdad is a minor league baseball player. And that's why they're moving around. Right. Because he needs to, like, follow his team. Uh-huh. And then they go on to write this great review where they're just laying out all these facts and examples about how they absolutely got it wrong and how none of it makes sense. Like how there's no way that a minor leaguer would be able to make a living wage to be able to do any of the things that are happening. Like how baseball itself doesn't function correctly.
I love when someone just digs out a niche like this. Like, yes. This is the hill that I'll die on. Everyone else has made every other criticism of Twilight, but I'm going to be that bastard that stands on the hill of they got baseball wrong, and that's why this is garbage. Like, that's amazing. You're my hero, random person on the internet.
Exactly. It's interesting too because there is like a minor league baseball team in Jacksonville and it's not and she made up one and they're upset that they didn't use the one that's actually real. And apparently the one that's actually real is a Marlins affiliate called Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp.
Amazing.
Yep. So I thought that was so enjoyable because for all the reasons to ever give it 1 star, I never would have thought the way they portray baseball.
Finding those pedantic ass nitpicks for things is always so funny because it's like, what kind of person lets something like this ruin an entire film experience for us?
A mad genius who just obsesses over a single point. I love it.
Imagine being kind of on board with Twilight the whole time for everything that it is and isn't. But because they got a few details about baseball wrong, you're like, what is this pap? This nonsense?
I'm sure that they weren't exclusively angry about the baseball. That's the hill that they knew they could die on because they knew everyone else had covered everything else. But
it just lost me.
Nobody else has talked about the baseball. Like,
it lost me completely. I was with it and just fucking lost it.
It also makes me wonder how much they must have gotten wrong for you to be that upset because it has to be a lot.
Right.
It has to be things that are so basic if you know anything for that to be the hill that you die on.
500 words is a short essay.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Rudd,
1 star.
Positive review I'm going to give. Rudd A says, this is a film about love. Love that can break all obstacles between two people, even if they are not compatible with each other. Love knows no borders. Producers wanted the audience to entirely understand the sense of this phrase. 5 out of 5 stars. Now, I know what they meant when they said if they are not compatible with each other. They meant this, like, fantasy, like, vampire human sort of thing. Different worlds, never able to come together. I just love the idea of them arguing that this is a story about love, even between people who are not compatible to love each other. Like, even between people who are incapable of loving each other. It has to be about love.
Yeah.
Oh, man. This has been a ride so far.
It has been. I've got a couple of negative ones I want to read. The first one's from Daniel H., and this one cracked me up. He said, I had to watch this because of my daughter. I'd rather have gone to the dentist. 1.5 out of 5 stars.
I'd rather have gone to the dentist.
I did find one bad review from someone who loves the books and hates the movies, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know that such a subgenre existed because, again, it's such a close adaptation when you compare it to something like Harry Potter that's had like 1 million directors and just every possible problem. Yeah, this person, her name's Jocelyn, gave the movie 1 out of 5 stars and said, I'm at a loss here. Anyone who rates Twilight as a 5-star film clearly should not be given an opinion on rating films. I was a huge fan of the books and went to movie premieres because Twilight was popular and I was in high school. Twilight is abysmal, and anyone who says otherwise clearly knows nothing about good movies. The Godfather is a 5-star film. Titanic is a 5-star romance. Twilight would get 0 stars in comparison if this rating would allow one to do so. And then they go on to describe about how Kristen Stewart was a really bad choice for Bella.
Oh, that bullshit.
And yes, and then like how they used to have a big crush on Taylor Lautner, but he was a bad choice. Robert Pattinson is a good choice. And just like, it's just really, really a strange, rambly review because they don't like the performances. I think the performances are awkward. Like, they just...
Maybe it was just seeing this stuff actually envisioned in front of them instead of having to piece together it in their heads that made them realize how bad this story was in the first place.
Yeah.
My God, I love something terrible.
It's interesting because they said, like, you know, Bella's really expressionless and monotone, and, like, she can't express any readable emotions with her face or her voice, and it's like, but again, that seems in character for the Bella I remember. Now, granted, I wasn't able to read all of the books, so I honestly just thought that was fascinating, and they just thought the acting and the directing and the studio and the color palette and everything was garbage, but the books are amazing. Oh, but they did like the soundtrack, so they got that going for them.
At the beginning, the book was more interesting, even though I didn't read all of it, just because of the sort of like psychoanalysis you can do of Bella as narrator. Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say this is like an unfaithful adaptation or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Last review I've got, and this is one that we've sort of already talked around and about, but this is from Lillian L. Lillian says, I'm sorry, but I absolutely hate you if you like this franchise. 0.5 out of 5 stars.
Oh, that brings me back.
Yeah, exactly. We've talked a lot, and we've expressed that we don't want people to hate, but let's talk about this sort of cultural hatred for Twilight. Why do you think that happened? Because there's always been, like, a counterculture against anything that becomes popular, and Twilight certainly does have a fair amount of things wrong with it to criticize, but why do you think there was this strong, vehement hatred for Twilight in particular? Like, why did this suddenly get people who are like, Twilight is garbage, and you're garbage for liking it?
I think a lot of it has to do with just the overall entitlement and gatekeeping of nerds. Mm-hmm. They saw a franchise that they decided was unworthy of being, you know, loved in the geek sphere, in the nerdosphere, in pop culture, and also the fact that, you know, it appealed to girls, and I think that pissed a lot of people off too. Mm-hmm. You know, girls loving something like that and something that they think is pure garbage. You know, they just lashed out at it.
There definitely was a sexist element in there. Yeah.
It kind of ties into the whole, you know, fake gamer girl cliche, you know?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, oh, you don't like real things, like real horror, real vampires, or real games, so of course you like this like shitty Twilight stuff. You're like a fake.
Yeah.
No taste.
It's so hard sometimes without the visual cues of being in person not to talk over each other. And I really, truly hate being talked over. And I feel so bad when I talk over you guys.
Yes,
but
you're not in the same room, so.
I know. Yeah. So I know that's why, but I still, it like hurts my heart anytime I accidentally talk over like Tyler or Isaac. The thing I think is interesting too is I saw a review that pointed out, like, you know, Twilight is so infamous even just for, you know, the meme, like, better love story than Twilight. Like, I forgot that was a thing. It is still used.
I still see it used to this day, and I'm like, God, people get a new line.
I know. And I also saw somebody who said, like, their review of Bella, it was like, their review for the movie was so brief, and it was like, ugh, Bella just gives me major, like, Wattpad vibes. This whole movie. And I love, there's something about Twilight where it's like, I feel like, maybe even more so than stuff like Harry Potter, which some people's parents like wouldn't let them read because of like magic and witchcraft. Like, it feels like millennials and even some Gen Z, like we were all kind of around for Twilight. Right. So we all have some opinion on it, whether it's good or bad. It's just kind of funny. I didn't expect to enjoy talking about it as much as I did. Because I don't think they're good films. I don't think they're good movies. But to actually like get into the discourse of it is actually like enjoyable. There's a lot there, and it's just such an immensely huge fandom that it's so hard to approach something that has just that much to it.
Yeah.
And I think some of it's jealousy because this is coming from the perspective of a horror fan and being in the horror fandom when Twilight was huge.
Yeah.
The horror fandom is more or less known to being rather welcoming of people, but not with Twilight. The horror fandom just completely rebelled against Twilight and anybody who liked it. And I can only assume because, like, it was out of, like, jealousy that this thing that has, like, what horror fans felt ownership over, you know, werewolves and vampires, but, like, they weren't done right. They weren't done how they're supposed to be. Like, it's not scary. It's not violent. It's not subversive. It doesn't do anything that... It's not horror, but it just uses horror iconography. So they resented it for becoming this pop culture phenomenon.
Yeah, that's very much true unless you're John Condit, the designer of the Vamp, the Twilight dildo, because he is a huge horror fan, and he ran a horror website. And again, he ran a horror website, and he also was connected with making sex toys. And then he was just like, "Hey, it's not really horror, but I'm gonna." And you guys, the way it was marketed was hilarious. They actually got a cease and desist from Stephanie Meyer.
Wow.
Because their marketing, they were like, don't let Twilight set on this new moon of a deal. And they were like, we weren't allowed to, like, call it Edward. So yeah, okay, so I wanted to look up the actual ad copy because I remember it. It said, in the twilight glow of the new moon, don't let this deal pass into the breaking dawn.
Oh my God.
And they got a cease and desist from Stephanie Meyer, and our lawyers were like, listen, if you take the book titles out, we're good. You can say anything, and everybody's going to know.
Can this just be a new part of the show? The podcast is just reading ad copies, like whatever the franchises are. I would love that.
I do also want to put out there that the people who made it, the guy who made it, again, he put 2 years worth of work into it. Like, he spent like 2 months just to get the shade correct of how pale it was supposed to be. He didn't want it to be too pink. He didn't want it to be gray. But before Twilight, he had an electric blue dildo that was called the Goliath that he really regrets he couldn't market when Watchmen came out. Because he was like, this is a Dr. Manhattan dildo, and I could have made a killing.
Yeah, he could have.
Yep. And then he also has an aluminum line, and so it's very like Battlestar Galactica dildos.
That's dedication to your craft. That's dedication.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like I got to get into the dildo business now.
Yes. I do also know for a fact that fans did try to get Robert Pattinson to sign those dildos.
Wow.
That is a thing that I saw confirmed by him. Can you imagine the awkwardness of someone being like, hey, please sign my dildo that's supposed to be your dick, but I need to make sure I can still put it in the freezer.
It would be super, super fucking awkward, but also it would kind of give me like this sense of rock star energy.
Of course that, like, it would, I think.
People are so obsessed with me that they want me to sign.
Yeah. But it's not even really you, though. It's not an Isaac dildo. It's a weird toxic vampire you.
If I portrayed a character and they were so obsessed with it that they asked me to sign their, like, that would just, like, I don't know, it would be gross and weird, but in the back of my mind there would be like a moment it's just like, hell yeah.
I also have to say, like, I really want to, like, have the confidence that the person the female who straight up walked up to him and said, hey, sign my dildo, this is your cock. Like, I can't imagine having that level of confidence meeting a celebrity. So I'm impressed by that.
All you have to do is burn out any understanding of social norms from your brain, and then that's how you gain that level of confidence.
And then you can do it.
Yeah.
Yep. And then you can do it.
You don't have those to begin with if you're going to make the decision to have a celebrity sign a dildo that's supposed to be them.
Yeah, to gain confidence, one must kill shame. Oh, boy. Do we have any recommendations based on Twilight?
Do.
You do?
I do.
Tyler, start us off with the recommendation section.
I got two.
Oh, boy.
And I might be stealing one from Erika.
Okay.
But this was airing on TV at the same time the Twilight series was coming out in theaters. The entire series isn't all that good, but the first couple seasons of True Blood are basically what you want Twilight to be if it was for mature audiences only.
Mm-hmm.
It's sexy, it's got a bunch of nudity and violence and just very melodramatic soap opera-ish storytelling done with vampires and werewolves and magical creatures, but it's done well.
Mm-hmm.
It's done right. I don't think I ever actually seen the whole series because I dropped out at like season 4 because I think it got shitty. But the first 3 seasons, I'd say, are well worth your time.
Right.
You could probably watch it on HBO Max because it was an HBO show. This movie came out in the 80s. It's called Near Dark, and it was a victim. It was a victim of Twilight. I remember. It was released on Blu-ray a while ago, and the cover art for the Blu-ray was completely Twilight. They made the main character guy look like Edward, like just like pale and gaunt and smoldery, and that's not reflective of the movie at all. It's a vampire western. It doesn't take place in the past. It takes place in the present 80s. About a young kid who gets taken in by a roaming vampire clan because he falls in love and becomes infatuated with the girl of the group. It's another, if you want to see Twilight done well, kind of recommendation. It's hard to come by. It's out of print physically, and I don't think it's streaming anywhere at the moment. Let me double check that. Near Dark.
I think we talked about this one during one of our Halloween episodes.
I think we did too. I think you can only get it on Prime, and that's it.
Okay, that's another good.
But yeah,
Erika, you have any recommendations?
I do. I have some book recommendations.
Oh, yeah.
They mostly. I definitely do recommend the Sookie Stackhouse books, which are what True Blood was based on. Fun fact: those came out just slightly before Twilight. And while working at Borders, the hatred between Sookie Stackhouse fans and the Twilight fans was literally something I had to deal with on a daily basis. There were sometimes actual fights. It was ridiculous. What a time. So I do have a couple recommendations, and this mostly kind of goes back to what we were talking about as far as like Edward's adopted vampire family.
Yeah.
There is a book called Deathstruck Year that is about the 1918 pandemic. It's a young adult romance book. So you got 1918 in there with the Spanish flu. Pandemic, which God knows is more timely than ever. And so it takes place in that time period in which Edward was turned and is a young adult romance book, but is not cringy. So that's a hard recommendation there. There is also another 1918 young adult paranormal romance book called In the Shadow of Blackbirds. So this has a lot of historical fiction, lot to do with the Spanish flu epidemic, like in 1918, and also has ghosts instead of vampires.
Oh, really?
Which makes sense because like spirit photography and ghosts were starting to be a very big thing after World War I with all of the soldiers dying. So that's enjoyable for any of you who enjoyed Twilight unironically. And also just in general, there's a very good...
Oh. Uh-oh.
Oh no.
Lost
It went out for you
right
too.
there at the end.
I can hear her in the other room. She's still going.
Is she still talking? Oh, no.
Wait. Can you hear me
We
now?
can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay, where did it cut out?
We lost you after that second recommendation, the one about ghosts.
Okay, but you heard all of that one?
We heard all of the part about ghosts.
My third one is a nonfiction book about the 1918 pandemic, and it's called Very, Very, Very Dreadful, The Influenza Pandemic of 1918. And I think that one's cool because it's a part of American history we don't really talk about, and a part of Twilight we don't really talk about. And that kind of shows what it was like at the time in which Edward was alive and would have been turned. I think a lot about the fact that Edward was born in 1901 as a little rich boy, and then that is the man who's going to someday marry weird, angsty Bella.
Yeah, you really got sucked into one little bit of backstory for Edward that wasn't nearly explained enough.
It's the most interesting thing about Edward to me is that. So those are some really good ones. And like I said, the 2 young adult romance books, one of them is just straight up YA romance. The other one is YA romance paranormal with ghosts. Again, if I can be trite, better love story than Twilight.
Oh boy. Why is it, quick before I do my recommendation, why is it that we only sexualize vampires out of all of the many undead? Why are they the only one that get a pass? I mean, they're still walking, shambling corpses.
I mean, that's how they were that's how they were brought into Western culture.
Where's my sexy zombie movie?
There is Warm Bodies.
There actually are.
There are a couple of sexy zombies.
I know, and
there's literally a movie called Zombie Strippers. Isaac,
is Warm Bodies the one that's the Romeo and Juliet? It's basically Romeo and Juliet with like a zombie boy who falls in love with a girl.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I retract.
For the sake of like seeing how the meme has continued, I googled Better Love Story than Twilight, and like the first hits are like a roll of toilet paper and a piece of shit, and still a better love story than Twilight, and a plug going into an outlet in the wall, still a better love story than Twilight. Like it, I understand what that person was saying about how this was a really specific time period of the 2000s, because even the memes for it are like those 2000s memes with like, there's a picture of like Scrat from Ice Age with his acorn, still a better love story than Twilight. Everything's in like that impact font.
Yeah.
The
impact font. That was the age of like Insanity Wolf and I Can Have Cheeseburger and comics.
Yeah.
God, that different era.
Nostalgic about meme templates. Oh.
My recommendation, because I feel that like so many vampire romance stories rely on this idea of a predator-prey dynamic, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box. I'm not going to actually talk about a vampire story. I'm going to recommend Beastars. Both the manga and the anime that's on Netflix. This is a world set with anthropomorphic animals. It explores a lot of the elements between like carnivores and herbivores. It's been called basically Zootopia with more violence and sex, and that's sort of a reductive explanation of what the series is about. It's a lot more of exploring how people deal with their instinctual urges versus the social expectations for them, how society is formed around these urges and yet also constrains them. It's got a lot of really fascinating like world building to explain how like a predator-prey relationship, not just in a romantic sense, but just in like a coexistence sense, could even function. It's a really good series. I do have a little criticism of how it ends, and the romance itself sort of becomes pushed to the side in later story arcs, but like the first season, it's central, and I would definitely recommend Beastars if you haven't checked it out yet.
All right.
That's a good rec, and you got to get your furry rep in there.
Yep.
werewolf rep.
Yeah.
That's the closest. We didn't talk about the werewolves at all in this review, so that's the closest thing we'll get to a werewolf rep.
Well, we don't see any of the werewolves. Well, we see the people who are werewolves, but we don't. Yeah.
Tyler, I feel like you guys should do one on ginger snaps, because then you can talk about like werewolfism. What do we call it? Lycanthropy. That's what we call it. There we go. I figured it out. We can compare that to like sexual development and menstruation and all the themes they're doing there.
Ginger Snaps is a masterpiece, and it's so not Twilight.
It's fascinating that like we have this sort of werewolf vampire dynamic, because they're both the idea of like being driven by these instinctual primal urges, but the vampire is like putting a coat of civility over it, while the werewolf is going full on into these primal instincts. I love the vampire werewolf sort of dichotomy that's shown up in horror in recent years, and just fantasy in general.
Yeah, I mean they're good bedfellows for stories.
Good bedfellow.
Hell yeah.
Get Bella out of the mix. I want Edward Jacob.
Oh, believe me, I'm sure it's out there.
Tons. I'm not reading through all that fic, though.
There's probably better fic out there than the actual source material.
Probably. Let's rate the damn thing and be done with it.
Okay.
So, Erika, you want to give a rating?
It gets like a decimal point. like a 0.2.
Okay. Tyler, I know you've gone back and forth on your whole take on ratings. You want to rate Twilight?
I will rate Twilight 3 vampire cooked meals that are ruined by Bella's non-appetite out of.
Yeah.
10 sparkly Inksy Edwards.
That's a lot of Edwards. I'm just going to give it 1 out of 7 Cullens.
Okay. Are there 7 Cullens?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. Thank you for listening to Tongue and Geek. And as always, don't throw your baby in the trash.
Unless it's a Twilight baby.
Unless it's a weird vampire hybrid baby that grows up and gets imprinted on by a werewolf.